It's just about to start the recording. Lovely. Okay. So thanks everyone for joining again. As you know, this event is being put on by the Wisbech High Street Heritage Project, and it's been really generously funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. If you look in the chat, we've got the link to the Wisbech website, which tells you more about this project in general. It's much more than just these talks. There's practical events as well as other things like Wisbech Underground. There's also links to previous talks we've done online in this sort of capacity on our YouTube channel as well, on the Wisbech YouTube channel. So both of those are in the chat there. Again, this is being recorded, but if anyone is watching this recording back on YouTube, there is a small video that will come up halfway through, which we can't show for copyright purposes, but that's being shown at Norton Priory Museum. So if you want to go see that video, then take a trip to Norton Priory. We'll start with Karen's talk, and then we'll take some Q&As afterwards if we have some time. So if you could just put that in the chat. So that's just the little sort of speech bubble icon, and right there if you have any questions. Again, if you have any technical difficulties as well, like you can't hear things or anything like that, then pop that there. As well, most things can be normally fixed by turning it on and off again. So if you have issues, try leaving and then using the same link to join back in, and sometimes that works, or even on a different browser. So just to introduce Karen, really excited to have Karen here. She's an incredible knowledge on tiles and incredibly enthusiastic, and I'm sure you'll all be equally as enthusiastic by the end of this talk as well. So Karen discovered a love of medieval tiles back in 1996 when she spent a week making and firing them while living as a Tudor at Kentwell Hall in Suffolk. Since then, she's been fortunate to be able to make it part of her living through demonstrating and teaching medieval tile making all over the country. She's still discovering new things about tile designs and understanding what these mean in the wider context of the medieval church and the patrons who commissioned them. And she'll talk about these wider impacts, as well as keep things local to Wisbech as well. So again, just a final reminder, if everyone could keep their microphones and cameras off where possible. And now I'll hand over to Karen.
Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you very much. Hello, good evening. Thank you for joining me. This is a short talk about medieval tiles and how they relate to the Wisbech area, because as soon as I was invited to talk about medieval tiles with a focus on Wisbech, I was very excited because I immediately realised that Wisbech is right in the centre of two places that I've done some research about the tiles, where the tiles come from. The main one that I'm going to focus on is the tiles at Bawsey, which is just on the outskirts of King's Lynn, and the other is Ramsey Abbey. So, and they're actually Wisbech is equidistant between those two places. But the majority of the tiles I'm going to be talking about tonight are to do with the kiln at Bawsey. So I'm starting with a ship, and the reason for that is I'd been aware of the tiles from Bawsey for quite a while, but didn't really have a reason or excuse to talk about them. And I was invited to the Hands Festival. I'm a medieval tile maker. I demonstrate medieval tile making, and this year's my 26th year doing that. And one of the wonderful things about the Hands Festival is that it celebrates medieval communities as they were in Europe in the Middle Ages and into the Tudor period. And as part of that, in 2015, a cog ship, a replica cog ship, made its way across the sea, across the channel, and was docked at King's Lynn as part of the Hands Festival. So we were allowed to go and have a look at it. And so I thought I'd start with that, because it was only actually getting on the ship and seeing the ship and realising and actually sinking in that King's Lynn is actually on the sea and part of the wash, and realising that some of the tiles that I knew had come from the Bawsey kiln, which is right on King's Lynn, that they were found in Boston. And it actually sunk in when I was on the ship. This is how they got the tiles to Boston. They might have seemed obvious to anybody else, but at that point I hadn't realised that that's how it was done. So I gave myself the excuse of then going to Boston to see the tiles in the Boston Museum collection. And I've just quickly knocked this map up this morning to show you just how that trip would have been done. This is England.
Sorry, Karen, just to introduce, we can't see your screen. Would you like me to share this for you? Or?
Yes, please. Can you? Oh, sorry.
That's all right. I'll share them now.
How do I do share screen? No.
So the little white box with the upwards arrow in it.
Hang on. Hang on. Let me go back
It should be next to your leave
Microsoft
button.
Teams. Right. Microsoft Teams. I'm in Microsoft Teams. I've got spotlighting. Where am I doing? Oh, up arrow. Sorry. Open share tray.
That's it. And you can either click on screen or window. It might be easier for you to click on window.
May have lost me. What do I mean by window? Screen.
Okay, so
Okay,
screen. Click on the square sheet, and then we can see everything.
Is that okay? Brilliant. Can
Beautiful.
You
Yes,
see
you can see your whole screen now. That's fantastic.
Sorry. I'll go back to the ship. There you are.
Thanks.
Ship. I'm sorry. I thought you were all looking at ship, but you weren't. Right. I'll minimise you. Okay. There you go. So there's the cog ship, replica ship, all hand built. Even the nails, everything was handmade, and it's beautiful and lovely. And there's a crew that live on it. It was wonderful. They were all getting ready, having their tea, and we went on board and saw them because it was in the evening after the event had finished. So that inspired me to go. This is King's Lynn. So this is the map that I've just drawn today. And unlike most maps, instead of showing the roads, it's showing the rivers, because this area in particular, there's Wisbech in the middle there. This area in the medieval period, so we're talking, the tiles were made, we think, between around 1340 and 1380. So they were made at King's Lynn, they were made at Bawsey, so there's Bawsey there. And so they were being shipped out of King's Lynn, across the Wash, and they were installed at Boston Priory. And they were discovered in the street, actually, because most of Boston Priory was demolished, and they were doing some street works in the 1930s, and they found some intact medieval tile floor actually underneath the street surface in Spain Street. But so that was what inspired me to go to Boston. And just to give you a bit of a bigger picture, this is the River Witham, which flows out through Boston and out into the Wash. This dotted line here is an idea, it's an impression of where people think that the actual medieval coastline would have been. And the reason that Boston is so important in the medieval period is that it was the biggest port other than London. London was the only port paying more tax in the 1200s in the medieval period. Boston was the second biggest taxpayer, and they were paying tax on everything they imported, and probably everything they exported as well. And there are lists that survive of those taxes, so there are tax records, and they detail the people who are paying tax as well. And so we have it in writing that Boston was a really, really big town, big port. And so all of the river networks, there are many more of them, and canal networks that were flowing into Boston and then also through King's Lynn. These were some of the main thoroughfares for transporting goods, not just tiles, but the tile makers would have been using these in order to transport their tiles, because tiles are really heavy and they're really difficult to transport in great quantities unless you float them on the river. So some of the places that I'm going to be talking about that tiles have been found from Bawsey are at Castleacre, so that shows where Castleacre is in relation to King's Lynn, that's on the River Nile. Those were then later, when they were discovered, they were taken up and installed at Castle Rising, and Castle Rising is just a little bit further along the coast. Wisbech here. Tiles from the Bawsey kiln were found in Spalding, in the church at Spalding, and that's on the River Welland. And then you've got Ramsey Abbey. So those are a different set of tiles, but this is also Ramsey was transporting its goods to and from Ramsey Abbey, and there are written records for that. And they found a medieval building crane, actually found a crane hole that was right by the side of what would have been one of the ditches outside Ramsey Abbey transportation. And then you've got Ely Cathedral and Cambridge, and those are also places that tiles are found, and they're still in situ there. So it's basically a network of rivers. So I used the excuse of having been to King's Lynn and seen the way that the tiles were transported to go to Boston. So my reason for going to Boston was I knew they had a tile, and I knew this because I picked up a postcard many years before of an exhibition when this venue first opened, the Haven, and they were advertising it with a dragon tile. And this is so rare, such an unusual picture, that I picked it up, and it's a tile, so I picked it up and kept it. And I promised myself that one day I would go and see the tiles. So here is the actual tile from that postcard. And as you can see, it was actually life size, so it's not very big. These are only 10 centimetres in size, these tiles. And this is them on display in the exhibition case at the museum. So they've got 5 that are on permanent display. They've actually got more like 11 or 12. And so these are some of the patterns that I'm going to be talking about this evening. And the reason for going to see the tiles in situ instead of just looking at photographs is that part of the understanding that I need to gain as a maker of these is I need to actually see all around them. I don't learn as much from just the surface. I need to see how thick they are. I need to see whether the sides are angled. I need to see just basically the proportions of them, and also sometimes, if I can, see the backs as well, because that tells you a lot as well about the tile. And what's good about being able to see them from the side with a good light, like you can here, is that you can see that these images, these pictures on these tiles, are quite unusual in that the image stands up proud, which you think is quite unusual because these are floor tiles, so people are walking on these. And what you can see with this lovely light is that the surface has worn away. So originally the surface would have been dark and shiny, like the rest of the background is, or in this case, green and shiny. And people's feet walking on these tiles has worn away that surface, and in a lot of cases it's worn away quite a lot of the detail of the pattern as well. So these tiles are in the collection at the British Museum. They're one of the part of a set of in total 13,500 tiles that are in the British Museum collection. And the majority of that collection, 9,500 of those, the individual tiles, were originally part of the collection from the Duke of Rutland. And the Duke of Rutland was the 9th Duke, and he began collecting tiles with his uncle in 1913 when he was still the Marquis of Granby. And they dug a tile kiln that was very close to where I live in Melton Mowbray. Together they went out to a farmer's field. We were told about tiles there, and they went together. His uncle was an antiquarian collector, and they dug their first tile kiln together, and that was what got him hooked. He got the bug, and from then on, for over 30-40 years, he died in 1947, he was known as the tile collecting duke. So antiquarian sellers would contact him if they had tiles. Landowners, if they found tiles on their land, they would contact him to come and either buy them from him or to dig the site. And he dug many places all around the country, all of the tiles in the north of North Yorkshire, and the tile kiln at Bawsey was originally found in the 1840s. I think it was 1843, and a selection of the tiles from that discovery, from the actual kiln itself, were eventually placed with the British Museum, and in other local museums. But it was then rediscovered in 1928, and again that owner put the tiles in the collection of the British Museum, and he also invited the Duke to come and see what he found. And the Duke was so impressed by what he found that he actually bought the farm that the tile kiln was on, and he spent part of 1930 and part of 1941 going back and redigging the site. And so the tiles then were collected into a catalogue by a lady called Elizabeth Eames, and these are some of the drawings, these little tiny fuzzy drawings. These are the drawings that were done for that catalogue, and they're all available online now, all available at the British Museum collection. And this is a photograph of some of the tiles, and this was in the book that I first read when I first began making medieval tiles, and it's a little book called English Tilers, and I've put details of this in a page at the end of the talk. And this image is in there, so that's how I know the Bawsey tiles, is because she talks about them there. And you can just see there's part of a dragon. So when the tiles were first discovered, they were documented. There were antiquarian collectors who were interested in tiles, and these look as though they were bought and taken to London and then painted by their collector. And this is in the collection of the British Library. This is from a book there, and this dates back to the 1840s. So there's a selection of 4 tiles there for the tile images. And this was a thing in the Victorian period. A lot of churches were being renovated during the Victorian period, and more of the original medieval tiles are being discovered underneath other flooring when the churches are being renovated. So tiles and tile collecting suddenly became very popular in the Victorian period, and it inspired makers like William Godwin, to copy these original patterns and to set them into these renovated churches. And what they were doing in a lot of cases was digging up the original warm medieval tiles and replacing them, often with exact replicas. So all of the factories like Craven Dunhill were recreating these patterns. This is a floor from Bangor Cathedral, based on the original tiles that were found there. So I mentioned earlier that the tiles from Castle Acre, just outside King's Lynn, when they were discovered, they were collected and they were put into the British Museum collection, what became the British Museum collection. When the tiles were discovered from the kiln in 1843, those were relocated over at Castle Rising, which is just a bit further over to the coast. And they were put on the wall above a fireplace, and you can still see them there. So when you go to visit Castle Rising, you can see a large panel, very large panel, in what was originally a doorway through to the main the main entrance into the original dining room. And that was closed up and made into a fireplace, and the tiles were put above there. So here they are, and you can see just from a distance, you can see the range of different glazes, different colours that they were using on these tiles. So you've got very dark glazes, quite pale glazes, green glazes, and somewhere slip has been painted on and then they've been glazed over top. And slip is just a white earthenware clay that's brushed on top. So these are quite a little bit better. They're quite difficult to take a photograph of because they've got some protective perspex put across the front of them at a low level to stop people touching them and rubbing them. So that's really reflective, so they're quite difficult to take a photograph of if you haven't taken the ladder with you, which I didn't. So there's a little few though. Some of them are heraldic, some of them are geometric, some of them have got animals in, so this is a stag. And when the Duke of Rutland dug the kiln site, he found some of the tiles which had collapsed inside the firing and stuck to each other. So these are known as wasters because they're wasted tiles, they can't be used. So here we've got a beautiful pattern, but you can't see the rest of it because this tile has fallen over into it. And this helps to demonstrate how the tiles were fired. They weren't fired flat on great big kiln shelves as modern tile makers and potters use today. They were stacked back to back against each other, rather like stacks of cards, and then other tiles put against edge to edge, which is all very well until somebody jogs you or there's a shift while the kiln is firing, and then they fall and stick together. So we don't have the original Bawsey kiln, that's lost. Nobody found it, the Duke didn't find it. But what we do have are some photographs, so it's never been photographed, but we do have photographs like these ones here from the Birmingham and Warwickshire Archaeological Society. This is from an article written by Philip Chaplin and published in their journal in 1936. This is a tile kiln that was found in Coventry, in an area of Coventry called Stoke, just like Stoke-on-Trent is named for the kiln stoking that was going on. That's why Stoke is called Stoke in Coventry. It's because they were stoking the kilns. This is about the biggest tile kiln that I can think of that's been found so far. You can see the size of it. There's a horse and cart here. And this is what was left standing of the kiln. It's very large. You can see that there's a cutting here. So this land was dug down into in 1911 when they were building more council houses. There's a house here at the end, so you can see how near it was to the roads and the rest of the terraced street here. So it's a miracle it wasn't found before. And I think that it was actually a rubbish tip. I think that after it fallen into disuse, it was just used as a waste ground. And so they were clearing that to get down to ground level, and they found this tile kiln. And this is another picture. So what you can see here are, there's a very large piece of the bag wall. So that's the sort of size of the structure that there would have been. And often with kilns like this, they were open topped. So they weren't like we think of wood-fired kilns, which is basically like almost like a building, and you open up the front and you load everything from the front. With tile kilns, they're very often stacked from above and then covered up with tile shards. And what you can see at the front here are a couple of fireboxes. So this is where the fire would have been set, and the fire would have run all the way down through these fireboxes and up through these slats. And if I go back to the other picture, you can see these rows here. And so the flames from the firing would have travelled up in between these. And these are like the substructure. These are what the tiles would have been set onto. They would have been stood on these. And you can see from this picture here, these tile kilns are made of tiles, basically. They're made of all the scrap tiles. Now that one was demolished, and you can't see that anymore in Coventry, but you can see this one at Norton Priory. And Norton Priory tile kiln, the archaeology at Norton Priory was dug 50 years ago. They just had their 50th anniversary, actually, of the first excavations that were carried out at Norton Priory. And most of the excavations were carried out in the 1970s by students from Liverpool University Archaeology Department. And they are just now starting to carry on with more digs. And from what I heard last week, they've actually just discovered a few more tiles, which is really exciting. But they found at Norton Priory, they found the biggest expanse of intact mosaic floor. Previously to this, it was up at Byland Abbey, but Norton's now surpassed that. So it's an absolutely enormous site with a lot of tiles. And this is the kiln, one of the kilns that they were fired in. So again, you can see there's fireboxes here at the front. The structure itself is built up of tiles, and they're pretty chunky at Norton. They're really quite big tiles at Norton Priory. And this is looking down into the kiln, and this is on show at the museum. So you can go along, you can visit it, and you can see it for yourself. And as far as I know, it's the only place in the country where you can still see a medieval tile kiln on show. There was one at the British Museum, but that's now not on exhibition anymore. But this is still here in Norton, and it's in their new museum. So we've got a central sort of bag wall here that helps to divide up the heat from the tile chambers with the flues here that you can see. And at the front here, this is looking at the front of the kiln from the inside out. And you can see on the top here, these are some of the tiles. So they've even been cut, ready to lay, ready to split up and lay. But these ones were obviously thought not to be good enough to use as tiles, so they've been incorporated into the structure of the kiln. So at this point, I'm going to now start my video. So I have a little video here that we made for Norton Priory. And this shows two methods of making tiles. One is to make large mosaic floor tiles, which are stamped with individual stamps. And the other is to make the form of tile that most people think of when they think of medieval tiles, which is inlaid, infilled, two-colour tiles. So I'll just get this started. I'll make it full screen, and then I'll play this. And yeah, there you go. So this is me in medieval costume, with quite a large lump of clay, and I'm rolling it out to make a slab in order to cut tiles from. So I'm resting it on two of my tile moulds, but I needed to have a very large lump of clay, as you'll see in a minute. I've got sand. I'm putting sand on the bottom to stop it from sticking to my board, and this is in order that I can then use a template. So this is cutting around a template. Shaped mosaics were, we think, cut round templates like this, wooden templates. And I'm using an awl, and in modern terms this will be a potter's needle, a thin tool that potters still use to cut round shapes with. So I'm just cutting a piece of clay out. They're about an inch thick, just slightly more than an inch thick, and most medieval tiles were that thickness or thicker. If you go up to the North Yorkshire abbeys, up at places like Revo Abbey, Byland Abbey, some of the tiles up there are 2 inches, 2.5 inches thick. They're very, very thick. But the minimum is around an inch thick. So this is a very small stamp, little carved flower. This is one of the patterns that was found on the tiles at Norton Priory, and it's very similar to some of the flower stamps that are used at Ramsey Abbey in Cambridgeshire. Similar technique, and you can tell that they're individual stamps rather than one whole carved block, because all the different tiles are unique. They're stamped in different places. This is just drawing through a thin layer of white slip, which is called sgraffito, just drawing through. There's some lettering in some of these shaped tiles at Norton. They're very unique, very individual, but there are parallels to the floors at Ely. Some of the shaped mosaics at Ely Cathedral are very, very similar to the ones at Norton Priory. So all these little tiny pieces all fit together, and they form a strip, probably about 1 metre wide. Each pavement style is 1 metre wide, and they run down through the length of the abbey in strips in several different patterns. Very unique. A lot of work, a lot of hard work. And then this is making more the tile that people think of when they think of medieval tiles. This is pressing the clay into a mould. It's more likely that the moulds would have been straight-sided and then trimmed, the tiles trimmed afterwards. And I use a mould with edges that are sloped, because when I'm demonstrating, I need to be able to show people the whole process from start to finish in quite a short time. I can't say to them, come back in a day when it's stiff enough for me to carve the edges. And I know that I need these tiles to be able to be usable for me to file them. So I have to do it all in one go, otherwise I will forget to trim them. So I've carved a wood block, and I'm putting that face down onto the tile, and then I'm stamping that with a wooden mallet into the tile. And then I'm going to take the pattern off, and the tile always spreads, but we know that they weren't stamped in a frame, because all the tiles that you find, they're all a different thickness, they're all a different, they're not flat, completely flat. And if you try and stamp your pattern in the mould, your tile's got nowhere to spread to, it's got nowhere to go, it's got no give. So it's just working it out from handling lots of different tiles. We know that they weren't stamped in a mould like that, they were trimmed afterwards. So I'm using white earthenware slip poured through a cow's horn, and that creates this pattern that sets on top of the tile and then shrinks slightly as it dries, and then I scrape it back, and then it's glazed. So that's the final tile, that's how the colour gets on, is from the colour of the glaze. So I'm just going to get rid of that. There we go, and then I can go on to our next picture. There we go. So this is the original of that pattern. So this is a tile that's in the Luton Museum collection from Bedfordshire, and this is daisy pattern, daisy chain. And so the inlay here, you can actually just see there's a chip out of the top of this tile. You can see the inlay is very thin. It's usually less than 1 millimetre thick. And the reason for that is because the white clay, the white earthenware clay, was the only sort of clay that the tilers would have had to pay for. So they used the minimum possible. So this is just to take you through a little bit slower, the making process. So the first thing is to carve a pattern. Now this is a pattern that I've carved where the pattern is the only thing you don't carve away. You carve away the background. The Bawsey tiles, you do the opposite. You carve away the pattern and you leave the surrounding clay, surrounding wood. But in this case, the pattern is then stamped into the clay. So this is a dry tile, but just with an inlay, with a inset pattern. And then this is the pattern filled up with slip. And then this is scraping away that surface. And when I'm demonstrating, I use a knife, a blade, thin blade, very flat-edged. In modern times, I use a potter's kidney, very flexible little metal kidney, to scrape it away. And this is when it's just perfect. You get a window of about 6 hours when it's just right and it's like chocolate, and the shavings come away just right. If you do it too soon, it's too wet and you blur it. If you do it too late, it's like powder and it's really scratchy and irritating and really bad to breathe in. So this is just right. And then that's it scraped back. So the surface is level, and what you can see is that the clean margin where the two colours meet. You can't see a gap, and it's just flush, and that's perfect. And it's not very often that they're that perfect. To be honest, it's quite easy to scrape it out. And then this is that tile fired. And what you can see here isn't. This is an area where I've scraped it just that bit too thin. And this is a leaded glaze, and the iron in the glaze is what gives it the colour, what gives it the honey colour, iron oxide. And that is quite corrosive, and that will actually eat away at the slip if it's too thin. So this is why you have to have that margin, and it's very rare to get it absolutely perfect. So the other sorts of tiles that there are line impressed. These are actually this is a range from the West Midlands that are found into Wales and around the Dudley area. And these are stamped into the clay and then either painted fully with slip or just left unpainted, and then they're fired. And so when you look at them at a bleak angle, you can see the depression that's left. So they're known as line impressed. And then we're back to the relief tiles, and this is an example from Bawsey Abbey. This is the only whole tile that's known to exist from Bawsey Abbey. This was found where the Ramsey Abbey gatehouses. It's all now a school area. It's built on the school, and they found that in the school gardens. So there is an online exhibition that you can look at with more of these tiles in it, but this is completely different to anywhere else. They aren't found anywhere else. They're not the same as the ones at Bawsey. They're much finer, very detailed, and they have this sort of mix of pattern and geometry around the edge. And the clay body, the actual material of the clay itself, is completely different, and that's the other big clue, as well as the patterns being different. When people look at the clay itself that's been used to make these tiles, that's how they can tell where they were made. So, some of the patterns from Bawsey. These are from the British Museum collection, the drawings. This is a tile that helps to date the tiles that were being made at Bawsey. This, in Latin around the edge, basically says, please remember and pray for the soul of the vicar of Nicholas de Stowe. So I think it says Nicholas at the bottom. And these are thought to have been made to go round his tomb when he died. And he was the vicar of Snettisham, and he died in 1376. So that's how they've been used to date the tiles that were made at Bawsey. And this is a photograph of one of the ones in the British Museum. And you can see here we've got the raised design and the lettering around the edge. And then in the middle here, it's not very clear. And this is, again, an indication of how they were made. This is showing that the clay would have been pressed very hard. The mould would have been really hammered down into the tile. And it's always more difficult to get the middle to go well than it is the edges. The edges are quite easy to get in. It's not so much pressure needed as to stamp the middle. This one's a little bit sharper and lovely and glossy. And again, these are wasters, so these are the ones that wouldn't have been made. And these are broken tiles. And then we come on to some lions. Now this again helps to date the kiln and date the tiles that have been made in it. These are the 3 lions of England, and in the 1340s, Edward III quartered the coats of arms of England with the fleur-de-lis of France to help sort of strengthen his claim to French territory. So these images, these are the images of the England's coats of arms before the middle of the 1300s. So we've got two different sorts here. There are actually three different types of lion. We've got this one here is in the museum collection at Norwich Museum from Blackborough Priory. So this one was walked on. It's the same image as the drawing I just showed you. And we've got lovely smiley lions with lovely bendy toes and big curly tails. And you can see here that from the wear of this tile that this one here is actually set the other way. So this is actually an inlaid tile rather than an upstanding tile. So the background here is worn away and he's stamped down into the tile. And then when we come to our next image, same design but different tile block, three more lions. And this one is from the collection at Boston. And these were upstanding and they've been worn away. So originally they would have had smiley faces, and the smiley faces have been worn away. So again, you can see it's quite a chunky thing. They're only 10 centimetres small. It's why I photographed them on this gridded paper, so I've got an idea of how big they are. Some of the patterns at Bawsey were heraldic. This is the coats of arms of the de Tosney family, and this is a Maunch emblem, and it's an image of a sleeve, a medieval sleeve, a lady's sleeve, and it's quite strange. This is meant to be her arm. That's the bit that connects to her body, and this is like a big hanging droplet that hangs down, a very big opening of her sleeve. And this appears on coats of arms in the Gray family at the tiles at Bradgate Abbey as well, Bradgate. And this is the example from the British Museum. Again, this is a waster, so this hasn't been walked on, and you can see that the whole surface is shiny, so there's our hanging sleeve, and it's quite an unusual heraldic device. And again, these sorts of things help to date tiles, because originally somebody in the family would have commissioned this tile. So we have other images, we have animals. These have a reason for being on the floor. All medieval tiles, all of the symbols, all of the patterns, all of the coats of arms will have had a reason for being there. Sometimes it's to do with the people who paid for the tiles to be laid. So in other words, the coats of arms and having tiles put round your tomb, as Nicholas Stowe did. He will have left a sum of money for that. He will have actually contributed and said, to commission tiles, I'll give a sum of money, I'll pay for so many tiles to be laid, and also sums of money for prayers to be said for me after my death. And in the same way that simple animals like this, stags, this is measuring the tiles, this is 10.2 centimetres. Measuring tiles at Bawsey, this one's from Boston Priory. Why would you put a hunting scene on a tile that's going into a church? Well, the answer is that there are stags, hinds, deer. These are all mentioned in the Bible. There are psalms that mention my heart, there's a pun on the word heart, my heart thirsts for the Lord as the hart pants for the running stream, is in one of the Psalms. So this is another example. This one's from Blackborough Priory. This is in the Norwich Museum collection, so it's another example of that. And you can see there are these little figures here, which are meant to be little running hounds, and there are a couple more on the edge of the tile. Then we have doves. Doves, again, are quite a common thing to find on medieval tiles. They are a symbol of the Ascension, and we've got one at Bawsey from the Boston Priory. It's a very, very dark tile, very difficult to actually see what's going on here. It's been badly stamped, but this was laid, it's been walked on, you can see the glaze has been worn away. So they're obviously, they weren't that worried about the standard of some of them. And that's a different dove, different aspect, facing the way. And then we come on to the dragons, and the dragons are my favourite. There are 3 different dragons at Bawsey, and dragons were associated with Norwich in particular. There's Snap, the dragon, the mama's head. There's a cloth covered wooden structure that's in the museum collection that they think dates back to parades and mummers' plays that were carried out in Norwich. And there was actually a St George's parade that was carried out in King's Lynn in the medieval period. That's been documented as well. So St George and the dragon may be one of the reasons why there are dragons on tiles. This is one of the designs. They look really Viking to my eye. This one is in the Norwich collection, Norwich Museum collection, again from Blackpool Priory. Again, this one is stamped in, so this is an inward stamping pattern rather than a relief pattern. This is like a lining press pattern, because the background clay is all worn away, the glaze is all worn away. You can just about see his feet there and these lovely spots going around him. And then the one that I like from Boston, originally Elizabethan's collection has documented it with little dots on, but these are all worn away in this example from Boston Priory. And he's got this amazing head with snappy teeth and sort of furled out bits behind his head. So yeah, St George and the Dragon. There are lots of dragony things going on around this period, around the 1350s. Edward III changed the patron saint of England in 1349. He changed it from what he had been, which was Edward the Confessor, and he adopted George, St George and the Dragon. He adopted St George as the patron saint of England in 1349, and then a year later, when he created the Order of the Garter, he incorporated St George as part of the heraldry for the Order of the Garter and created that. So they're very timely. There was a lot happening at that period to do with dragons. This is a picture that I took when I went to see this dragon tile, and the one thing I haven't mentioned is that it is sliced across the middle here, and this is something that goes back to how the tiles were fired. They were stacked back to back. Little tiny pieces like this, if you wanted a half a tile, you would have to score them, because they are an inch thick. You score them halfway through, but you don't break them into 2 completely. You file them as a whole tile, and then you snap them open when you go to lay them. But you do find lots and lots of extra tiles which have been laid that have had this scoring, and sometimes they're quartered as well, so they're actually made up into many more divisions than this. But it doesn't seem to bother them that's been cut and been left as it is and not divided up. And so this is just to sort of highlight that, tip it up and show the edge. And this is just to show the backs. These are 2 dragon tiles, and this is what I was talking about, how uneven they are. If you look here, you can see this tile is not square at all, and when you compare them edge to edge and look at them, they're not flat and they're not even in any dimension really at all. So this is why when you look at catalogues of medieval tiles, they always give a range of sizes. So they range and they vary. Even on one tile, it can vary by quite a few millimetres from one end to the other about how big it is. So this one is much thinner than this one. This one's much worn, probably because they were skidding over it. And it's very comforting as a maker of tiles to see how perfect mine look in comparison with the originals. So this is the 3rd dragon image, and again he's got wings and looks a bit like a bird actually. So just to throw something in that isn't a tile, St Margaret of Antioch was a patron saint, is a patron saint of women in childbirth, and one of the miracles that St Margaret of Antioch was said to have performed is that she was swallowed by a dragon, and she escaped by climbing out of the side of the dragon. And this is a wonderful artefact. This is a reliquary. This is a leather case. It dates between 1350 and 1400. It's in the Met Museum collection, and it's wonderfully, beautifully tooled leather, depicting Margaret of Antioch, St Margaret, climbing out of the body of the dragon. And one of the churches that dragon tiles were laid in one of the areas was actually dedicated to St Margaret. So whether that's St Margaret of Antioch or not, I don't know, but it's possible that that's why there are dragons on tiles. Is not to do with St George, but more to do with St Margaret. So here's the heel of this boot, and this is a case that would have held a relic, a foot-shaped relic, and it's thought that this ring here would have been used to suspend it over women as they gave birth, so that they could gain inspiration and offer up thanks when they survived to St Margaret. So here she is offering up prayers with her halo climbing out of this body of the dragon, and there he is with his teeth and feet. So I just thought I'd throw that in there because it's glorious and it needs to be seen. So here we are, we're almost there. We've got Thomas, and Thomas on this tile. Now Thomas was thought to refer to a particular Thomas who had a church dedicated to him, was a vicar in a church. I actually think that this may be dedicated to Thomas a Becket, just because there are so many of them, and Thomas was celebrated, Thomas a Becket was celebrated in artefacts, in pilgrim badges, in paintings, in all sorts of things all over the country. And the other important thing about this tile is that it shows that the tile is backwards. The tile, when you carve your woodblock, you have to start off with your pattern backwards as you carve it, and then you print it into the tile, and it reverses the image. And this wasn't done in this case, sadly, particularly as one of the other things that it's trying to show is that the use of literacy in the church was a sign of goodness, sign of godliness, and was the opposite of illiteracy and heresy. So there were many texts that were written all about how heretics were illiterate and they were preachers who didn't read and didn't study their Bible properly, and that's why they're heretics. And so the church and writing and the writing of manuscripts, the writing of books, literacy was celebrated in the church, and this example of Thomas's name was a part of that. It's just such a shame that they didn't get it the right way around, but it was still laid, and it was still laid in a lot of places. So this one is Spalding. This is from Spalding Church, from the British Museum collection. This one here is Newton in the Isle, and this is from Wisbech Museum. So you can go to Wisbech Museum and you can see this tile. They reopen on the 3rd of February. And then this is the final tile I want to show you. This is one of the geometric patterns, and this is a daisy wheel. And this is a symbol which is found in churches, very often carved into some of the wood that's there. It's carved into stone, and it's also etched in the form of what they call graffiti, medieval graffiti, on all sorts of surfaces. And this tile has sets of 3 little leaves or petals around this wonderful 6-petal daisy. And the 3 is a symbol of the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And the 6 is basically a celebration of that twice over. So it's 2 interlocking triangles that form this daisy. So this example is from Norwich Museum, from Blackburn Priory. And I dropped this on my husband yesterday evening, because one of the things that Charlie does is he carries out constructional geometry. He studies medieval constructional geometry, the geometry that was used to construct churches and cathedrals and abbey complexes. Everything that you see, all the buildings that you see, were constructed using nothing more than a pair of compasses and a straight edge. And with nothing but those, you can construct the building blocks that you require to construct the layout of your church. And what he's done is he has, if I just go back to that tile, he's taken the form of the circle that you can see here. This is a circle, that's the circle. And what he's done is, using a set of compasses, he's started started with a circle, and then he has created, taking that same circle from a compass point here on the edge of the circle, he's then constructed the other circles that together form the petals. He's then taken a straight edge and he's created these triangles. And from those triangles, where they intersect, everywhere that a triangle intersects, that is a legitimate starting point to then go off and form another form of circle or another set of triangles. So he's used the intersection of that to create a smaller circle that you can see here in the middle. And then he's used that to create another set of triangles, and within those he's created another circle. So you've got three circles, again you've got the three circles, and the smallest circle, the inner circle, he's then used that, he's put that on that point where the intersection is of the, so you've got 6 points here originally on these outer circles, and then he's created these intersecting points across, which give you the 12, and then he's put this little circle on the edge of that circle, and this forms these other shapes. This is how he's managed to get to these other shapes. So you've got these inner circles creating these little triangles, and he then took it further and was able to form the final forms on the outside edge as well. He then took it further, but it was a little complex at that point, and I said that I didn't think I could actually see any further, so this would have to be it. So this is my last slide. So thank you very much. I'll just minimise that, and I will find you and put you back up again. Oh. There we go. Right, there I am. So do I now stop sharing my screen? I think I do. There we go. Stop sharing.
Yeah, if you could just stop sharing, that's it. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. That was such an interesting talk, and it's so good to hear that there's tiles in Wisbech Museum that we can see now. Oh, yes, sure.
Sorry, I've got one more slide. I forgot. Sorry. Hang on, I forgot. Let me just go back and share my screen again. I'm so sorry. Screen. There you go. Sorry. that is my final slide, which is the where you can go and find information about the medieval tiles, and where you can and where all the copywriters come from. So all the people who own those images, where they all come from, and they're all I'm able to use them because they've got educational use. So this is a thank you to all the tiles that I've visited in the different museums. So for more information, you can go and see, there's a link here. The Ramsey Archaeology Project has a wonderful video exploring the tiles in great depth there. You can go and see the tiles at Wisbech Museum, Boston Guildhall Museum, Norwich Museum, and at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. You can go and visit the Norton Priory Museum, and the British Museum in London has the medieval tile collection online, so they're freely available to look at and work your way through. And then there's 2 books that I recommend if you want to do more reading. One is English Tilers, which is available second-hand by Elizabeth Eames, British Museum publication, English Craftsman. And then Medieval Tiles, which is a Shire publication by Hans van Linnen. And then I recommend that you have a look at the Tiles and Architectural Ceramics Society website. There is a gazetteer there of tiles, mainly Victorian tiles, but they do also have entries for medieval tiles where you can go and see those in situ in churches around the country. Okay, so I'll minimise that and I'll stop sharing. Maybe I can stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's really useful, and thank you so much for such a fascinating talk. I know you could have talked for hours about to go in depth even more about some of those elements. But thank you so much for trying to fit a very big topic into such a small space of time. We'll just see if we're running a little bit low on time, so we'll just see if we've got any questions from the audience. Quickly. I don't know if we have any from the chat. If you have any questions, please either put them in the chat. Oh, I see one. We've got one from Hugh, who said, thanking you for your talk. And is there evidence for multiple molds for particular tile designs, or would one person just have worked a single mold to make all the impressions?
Oh, good question. Yes, is the answer to that. Yes, there are, because there are three different lions at Bawsey, and there are also a couple of other of the tile patterns where there are duplicates. So Elizabeth Eames thinks that there are poorer copies. So in other words, there was the master copy, and then there were a couple of more copies made. Now, whether it means that the first tile maker went off with their block, and so they had no choice but to make another one. It's not clear whether they were all in use at the same time. It's very difficult to tell exactly when. But the only thing we have from the other point of view, in that there was only one block, is that there's quite a well-known image of a lion-impressed griffin, which has a crack across the block, and it was fixed by hammering it together with a medieval nail. And we know that because the nail actually protrudes through the surface of the woodblock, and then they carry on using that woodblock. And then it obviously split again, because then later on you see another nail suddenly appears from the back of the block, and so you get the tip of the nail showing. So there are two nails then holding it together. And then finally, there's another series of tiles that are made with this same block, and then part of his tail falls off. So some of the tiles, he's got part of his tail missing, but they still kept using that block. So that to me indicates that actually no, there was just the one block. They all took turns with it, and when it broke, they fixed it. So yeah, good question.
That's really incredible to think how sort of valuable these blocks must have been, that they
Yeah.
repaired them rather than remade them, and also how I know you were talking before about the score line between how perfection was a different idea than what we think now.
Yes, yes, there was. And what I didn't really say, because I was trying to finish on time, was the reason that I got Charlie to do the geometry is that tiles are very often seen as a thing apart. They're sort of they're either an add-on, or because they've been discovered quite late, they're not seen as something that are sort of integral and an integral part of the medieval church and medieval abbey. And the people who were designing the tile blocks, they were using the same methods, the same geometric way of setting out their patterns as the church designers, the church builders were. The same people who were using this method to plan out wall paintings with. Um, the same method that the carpenters were using to set out the designs on their wooden boxes that were going into the churches. They were all using this same method of geometry, this same way of using a pair of compasses and a straight edge to do their designing. And so it seemed to me it was just a really important thing to sort of bring Charlie and the geometry into tile making, because it's something that gets overlooked really, is they were very much a part of the culture, and they were a way of explaining to the people who were visiting the church why they were there, what they were looking at, what they were hearing, what they were seeing, because people were going to church 2 or 3 times a week. It wasn't just on a Sunday, and they didn't have a choice. It wasn't something that you could opt out of. Everybody had to go to church. In the Tudor period, you were fined if you didn't go to church, and they were something to explain the stories, because the stories in the Bible were in Latin. The vicars were preaching in Latin. They couldn't read and write. They couldn't read the Bible. So these were stories that were told on the tiles, basically, in the same way that the stories were told in the paintings on the walls and in the glass in the windows. So there you go. Oh, I can't hear you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So it just reminds you how holistic this whole the whole building practice of a church is.
Yeah.
We've just got another question from Carenza. She said, really interesting talk. Sorry, she missed a little bit in the middle, but have you ever tried firing using a reconstructed medieval kiln?
Yes. I learned to fire. I learned to make medieval tiles whilst taking part at Kentwell Hall in Suffolk. And well, there were two kilns there, two pottery kilns. One was a later style kiln. It was what's known as a downdraft kiln. So it had bag walls, and it had a system where the flames rise up and roll around the kiln and come back down again, which is a later design. But the first kiln fired in was an updraft kiln built by an archaeologist based on a plan from the kiln and much more difficult to fire, actually, much harder to fire. And so yes, I learned. The reason I started making tiles was because I'd taken part at Kentwell Hall since 1988, and I'd had 8 years of helping to fire those kilns at Kentwell, because the potters there are really generous and they share what they're doing with everybody. And so I helped fire the kilns, and it wasn't until 1996, after I've been going for 8 years, that my friend Phoebe and I one year said, well, what should we do this year? And we said, well, let's have a go at making tiles. How hard can it be? And it was only because of all the people at Kentwell that helped me to fire those tiles and helped me to learn about making tiles that I was able to go on and do it. So yes, I started off as a wood firing potter. I haven't tried in. I know Oliver Kent has reconstructed some actual tile kilns, and I know that Diana Hall has done it as well. I haven't had a go yet, but there's still time. There is still time. It may yet come. Can't hear you. Sorry.
Thanks. Thank you so much. I think we've just run out of time, but that was a really, really interesting talk. And I'm sure if you pop your details in the chat, or if anyone wants to get in contact with myself, and I can pass your details on if anyone has any further questions or want to be pointed in any directions. So again, thank you so much for your time. Again, everyone, this video will be uploaded onto YouTube in the next couple of days, so you can watch that back if there's any sections that you missed. And thank you again to Heritage Lottery Fund for funding this, and to the Wisbech Heritage Project for setting these talks up as well. So yeah, thank you, and I'll let everyone get on with their evenings.
Thank you. Thank you very much.